Hi, my name's Amanda Foxenhill, and this is Suddenly Autistic, the YouTube video series where I am chronicling the where I feel like I've got to the end of a chapter of understanding and sort of bookmarking an insight that I have, or if I feel like I've had on my journey of integrating my new knowledge of being autistic. And through that process, there's been a lot of thinking, a bit of reassessing of things, playing back in my mind, and going over things with a therapist and myself, doing a lot of work myself to understand the roots of some of things, the problems that I've had, including traumas, anxiety, preferences, routines. Where do all these things come from? In the bid to find out who not really who I am, because I feel like I've always known who I am, but why I am, how I can make my life more, like, much smoother, more rewarding, and balance some of the tensions that I have within myself as an autistic person and when I come out into the world. I was driving home the other day and playing in the back of my mind sort of is this unresolved thing about attachment theory. The video kind of got there. I felt really good about it that I put out on YouTube, but I sort of knew that it didn't hit the mark completely. But anyway, I tapped into the psychology podcast, which is by Scott Barry Kaufman, and I just so happened to click on this episode with Gabor Mate, The Myth of Normal. It was intriguing. Myth of Normal sounds intriguing. Didn't really know much about Gabor, heard his name before, but not really consumed much content, so I gave it a go. And I'm so glad I did, because I feel like this episode summed up everything about the attachment process that I probably didn't manage to communicate so well in my last video. In a nutshell, Gabor talks about this tragic tension between the two basic needs that humans have. The need for secure basic attachment in terms of security of, food, house, your basic needs being met, and having some relationship there, not just a machine that delivers, but a human providing some shelter, that kind of thing. The other basic need he talks about is authenticity, the need for us as people to be loved and seen as authentic, in our authenticity, in our authentic selves, to be free to just be. Gabor talks about the fact that we go through this individualization process, and it's most visible for the first time as toddlers when we go through the terrible twos, and parents often talk about it that way, and parenting has provided us with many different skills and methods of diverting a child's attention and controlling and managing their behaviour. And I think at that point I want to say, look, I've had toddlers, I've had children, I've had teenagers and teenagers in distress, and I've now got young adults. There are times when we have to rein in our behaviour. We have to, as parents, model behaviour or direct behaviour. This is not the same as disrespecting the authenticity of that person. The authenticity of that person comes from within them, the why, the what's going on inside for them, where is the tension within them that they can't quite contain. Modifying the behaviour in a generous and authentic way is respecting and responding to the needs of that authentic individual as a parent without adding a layer of shame. Some people find things difficult and they can get frustrated and then angry because they have a physical disability. Me, for a thing as a kid. My mum will tell me stories of how she had to take some certain I can't remember which toys, but I used to apparently ask for a lot of things for toys for Christmas or whatever, or games or whatever, and I'd get them and I would struggle with them for whatever reason. Usually, I'm quite clumsy, I don't have that great fine motor control, so maybe I would have asked for something as a little kid that was outside of my age range and I'd struggle to complete it and I'd get very frustrated and angry. Now, a parent intervening in that and taking that toy off me and then diverting my attention maybe, or comforting me, or doing whatever, is working with my authenticity and recognizing something about myself that I hadn't yet got the insight to self-regulate. So that's not what we're talking about. And self-regulation issues can come at any age, at any stage, from cradle to grave. So modifying and managing our behavior in that context is definitely something that Gabor's not saying don't do. And it's not saying, I'm not saying, oh great, we should all be able to just do whatever. We do need help with regulating and understanding ourselves. But where something like that, so for example, if I asked for a toy and I played with it and then I got mad and I smashed it, which I didn't tend to do, but if I did, or if I got really angry and then I was upset and crying, or I went out and I don't know, started going a bit, running around and a bit wound up, being told off for being wound up and shamed for that would not be the right thing to do. Seeking the cause, the origin, and then connecting it and saying, oh, well, I can see why you're, that activity, has made you, that's contributed to these feelings, these big feelings that you're having. It would be great if we do something else right now. Let me help you find an alternative thing to do. That kind of thing. So that's a little bit of detail and a little bit of the bigger picture all mixed up. Gabor talks about this, as I said, this tragic tension, and he mentioned really beautifully that at some point in our development as people, probably very, very young, when we're very, very young, in fact, that we learn that sometimes our authentic expression of ourselves is at odds with our attachment needs. So, for example, the way we show up in the world is making it uncomfortable or difficult for our parents, and that is then jeopardizing our relationship or our attachment to them. That is the bit for me that was missing, that bit there. Whether it actually was missing or whether it's my perception, I don't know, but it's the bit that's made sense of, for me, finally, of why the attachment theory thing is such a tense thing. The way I sum up what Gabor was talking about is this: it's really essential, the essentiality of humans to be loved and accepted for just being as opposed to doing. The human being, not the human doing. Regardless of how difficult that is for other people at times. And it will be difficult and more difficult depending on how each person shows up. Some personalities, some combinations of skill sets and mental processing, easier for other people to deal with than others. But we should all have that opportunity to be authentically loved and seen as we are. Gabor Mate's conversation on the podcast really, really helped me, massively has helped me. This idea, which has resonated with me a long time, of being a human being, not a human doing. This way that we're starting to more often bring up children now to understand the value of their authenticity, their authentic selves. Society has not been about authenticity, and authenticity is not about the I or the me generation. It's not about selfishness. This is not selfish. Being authentic isn't selfish. Being authentic is being your true, whole, beautiful self. You can't fulfill your destiny, whether you think that's God-given or otherwise, if you're not authentic. Because if you're not being authentic, you're holding something back. You're using up some energy to squash a part of yourself or moderate a part of yourself. And again, I'm not talking about, there's always times when we have to do that. It's etiquette, it's rules, it's situations. But if you want someone to reach their life's purpose, to achieve their purpose, to feel flow, to feel comfortable, to feel beautiful and generous and have their hands wide open, you have to accept them. The biggest upset, the cause of loneliness in my life has been this realization, without me being able to put it into words, that me being authentically me is difficult for some people. Me being authentically me has been difficult for my children at times. has been difficult for my parents at times. Less difficult for my husband because he's known me on a different level. But confusing, difficult, awkward, embarrassing maybe at times for others. So in listening to this podcast and listening to Gabor and, what's his name, Brett, the other guy talking, I'm really seeing where this tragic tension comes in for me personally, where it's come into my life, and how some of the responses to this tragic tension can set inside the individual feelings of shame, unworthiness, disgust, awkwardness, rejection, loneliness, all sorts of things. I have to say at this point that I feel quite lucky that while I've always been very good at noticing patterns of behavior especially. So I will notice the patterns and the comment, the non-verbals of other people without necessarily understanding why, but I will notice if some of my behavior is causing other people distress. But I won't necessarily know why, and I don't have a great capacity to change my behavior. Growing up, I grew up in a family where there was definitely rules, protocol, and behaviours, expectations. You behave a certain way, you respect people, the rules are the rules, we respect authority, the police, the laws of the land, you pay your taxes, you do all of that. I like that as a general ethos of being. I think that it helps to have rules around relationships, and I've not been a rebellious person against rules. Although what I have been is intellectually curious, and there have been times when I felt that the rules of the day, of the family, of the school they're a little bit pointless, they don't really make sense, they're not really achieving the outcome that they're desired for, so they're worthy of a bit of testing. An example of that would be socks. I was talking about this to a friend yesterday. At middle school, we had a policy of you had to wear black or white socks, I think. I wore stripy black and white socks, and they were not the uniform, and I'd get told off about them. But I did that because it was an example of the absurdity. I was demonstrating the absurdity of the rule. I was a good kid in class. I got all my work done. Why would they take me out of class and sit me outside the head teacher's office for wearing stripy black and white socks when clearly I'm ticking all the important box? This is a minor thing. I was making a rebellious young teenager demonstration of how silly that rule was. Less likely to do that around other things, especially, things like, speeding, drink driving, that kind of thing. I do not enjoy making other people feel bad, sad, angry, upset, embarrassed. In fact, I really don't like that at all. I would rather be invisible also than have all the oxygen, power, and eyes on me in the room. I simply wish to be seen and be accepted for who I am. I'm willing to yield and put I suppose my needs a little bit back for the sake of the greater good, the experience of everybody and the enjoyment of everybody. I go to, there's a couple of cafes. We'll go out to a cafe or something with my husband and my family, and there's some that really do my head in. They're too loud. I will go there when I've got enough energy. I know that it's going to drain me and that the noise is too much, but for the sake of the family and the fact that there's lots of other good things about it, I will go. If we can sit somewhere where it's less intense and noisy and I feel a little bit more secure, then I can stay there longer and be happier and be more engaged in the conversation. That's not always possible. Sometimes it's terrible, but it has its limits and it has its consequences. So a consequence might be when I come home, I have to go straight to bed, or I don't want to talk, or I need to have a sensory, decompression shower or something like that, just in the dark. These are all coping strategies. Being authentically yourself, me being authentically me, doesn't mean letting rip. It doesn't mean being the whole, turned up, magnified version of myself in every situation. There are times when my authentic self is not going to gain anything by doing an activity or going to a place. For me, it's not necessarily going to make my life easier, better, or more fun, but I will still do it in cases where it works for the greater good, because we live in a relational world and I value relationships like anybody else does. It's just the costs are quite high for me sometimes. What I'm trying to say here is that the tragic tension for me, when I first realised that me being me was tragically sometimes undermining of my personal relationships, it was making me difficult to love, difficult to accept, awkward and painful to sometimes be with, or at least a little bit uncomfortable or not ideal at the lowest bar. I had to accept that and had to accept the pain that came along with that and have had to until such point, which is basically now, where I have better insight into why. The reason I think my experience has turned into complex trauma is because there's been many hundreds of micro aggressions and disrespections, I don't know how to say that, of me being authentically me. So I have not knowingly been inauthentic. But the times when I felt most traumatized and most desperate are where I've realized that in me doing that, it's causing other people tension and it's making me less safe. Not being able to keep myself safe, not being always or even often recognized for who I truly am, mainly being misunderstood, has caused me a lot of pain in a way that I'm not able to keep myself safe, not able to correct that because I have a lack of capacity to yield in ways that are outside of my authenticity. So I can only be authentic. I can be authentically appropriate. I can be appropriate and authentic, I should say. So I can behave in an appropriate way in a different environment, adapt to situations, but there will be a cost, and I'll have to come home and decompress, or go somewhere and decompress, or take time out to decompress. But what I can't do is be inauthentic. I can't live inauthentically. There's no such thing as inauthentic me. There's just me a little bit squashed, or me free, or me extremely crushed. The burden, the pain, is something internal that we work on. It's a tragic tension within ourselves to understand and then process. And that's, again, brings me back to why I'm doing this. I'm doing these videos, making these videos so that I can understand myself better, so that I can think out loud, because that's how I think best, and that I can possibly share them to hopefully help somebody else, but definitely help myself. There's always going to be a tension, I believe. When you're authentic, we have to accept tension as part of life and as part of relationships. But it doesn't have to be tragic. The tragedy that Gabor talks about for me is when we're not seen as our authentic selves. An authentic person can still be very, very difficult to manage, can still be very draining. But that relationship should, if it's authentic and honest and valuable, it will still be good. It will be good anyway, because the goodness and the purpose isn't linked to whether we like it or not. That's a preference. It's linked to whether it's worthwhile. And of course it's worthwhile if we're following a path to authenticity and we're helping our children and our friends build their authentic self. So our discomfort should not be the moderator of that conversation, should not be the measure of how well we're doing. That should just be something that we work on separately. Thank you.